everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to talk to you today. I'm Michelle Lewis. This is Kristin Marquet, and we are just going to chat with you a little bit about branding and PR. We've been collaborating together for a couple months now, and so excited to be putting this challenge together and giving you guys this education. But we've noticed that there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace when it comes to what exactly branding and PR really are. And I know that you've probably seen in different Facebook groups, people posting photos or promoting themselves, and it is actually a lot more detailed than that. So Kristin, why don't you give them kind of an overview about what branding and PR really are and why it is so vital for them in order to succeed in their business?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you don't have a brand, you're not going to stick out. Customers aren't going to know who you are, the media. There's going to be no opportunities for you to get media coverage. So you really need to have a cohesive brand story. All the elements between the colors, the typeface, the overall positioning, your brand value proposition, they all need to make sense. And Michelle will talk about that a little bit more. But that sets you up for success on the PR side. So if you don't know what you're trying to pitch and you don't have your brand story down, you're not going to have anything to pitch. You just can't send a one-off, really self-promotional pitch to the New York Times because nobody's going to read it. So there really needs to be some type of story behind and some type of reason behind what you're trying to do. And we're going to talk about that at length today.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. And we are, at least for me, I am coming to you as a previous disaster brand before I really figured out what branding was going to be for me and before I incorporated my experience with TV, film, and natural medicine. So you are in the right place. I've done it the wrong way, and now I'm doing it the right way. And there's been such a night and day difference. So we're going to dive into the education. Let's do it, Kristin. Hit me.
Absolutely. So the one question that I get a lot from small business owners, and you and I have had a number of conversations on, are what are some of the biggest struggles that small business owners have when it comes to branding, and how can they fix those? How can they overcome those struggles? What are some tips that you have for small business owners that are actionable and they can implement, right away?
Yeah. Well, I think the small business owners and entrepreneurs, both of those titles are now very synonymous. And it can be really hard, especially because most of the women I work with, they've either left their 9-to-5 or they're trying to transition out of their 9-to-5, or they're stay-at-home moms that are trying to figure out what makes them different and what they can offer. And so they just kind of throw themselves, and this is what I did in the beginning, into Facebook groups. They slap up a website and they just kind of are trying to engage, but there's no real clarity on what they offer, who they are. And so it's a really painful struggle. And when there's not the money coming into the bank and when there's no real reaction, they tend to self-punish and give up. So I think the biggest mistakes that you can see in branding, especially early on, is not really diving into what makes you unique, what services you can really offer, because I'm going to go to my target audience here. A lot of women are not given the opportunity or the permission to be able to understand that they have a lot of value in a lot of what they can offer. So when you're going into branding, be careful not to focus too much on, okay, what is everyone else doing and trying to emulate that, because you're not going to stand out. You really have to focus on who you are and what your voice is. And I definitely wish when I started out that I had really sat down and nailed that down first, because I was throwing up just pictures my husband had taken of me over the years that were all in different clothing in different locations and weren't necessarily cohesive at all, and trying different things in different groups, and just none of it worked. And I didn't get any good feedback from my website. It was just crickets for so long. So I think that's kind of the biggest mistake in terms of the effort that a lot of people bring to branding in the beginning.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we see it all the time on Instagram, just using as a concrete example. people, they'll just slap up all these different color photos and there's really no rhyme or reason, and you're really not supposed to do that. And that ties in very well with what you were saying about just kind of having things in silos and nothing really making sense.
Yeah.
So absolutely. So at some point, we're all going to fix our brands and create a really cohesive package. But I think that a lot of small business owners, entrepreneurs kind of get overwhelmed because they don't know what the next step is. What would be your suggestion for the next step after they've come up with this really beautiful brand story and everything just makes sense and it's really cohesive and they have clarity on that side, but they don't really know how to take it to the next level?
So if you've got your mission statement really clear and it's rocking, you've got your ideal client, you know exactly who they are, you've made kind of your written down drafts and proposals of where you're taking your business, I think you have to make sure that you first have your pillars in place of what you can offer. So like for my business, I focus a lot on systems and video and branding. And sometimes we have so much written down on what we offer on this single sheet of paper that there's no way for your audience to kind of have that organized in their minds of exactly what you do. So I would highly recommend write down your pillars and then structure your content and how you're going to be reaching your audience via blogs and videos and Facebook groups under those pillars so that you're not all over the place. When you feel like you have all of that in place and you worked out your color palette and it's very clear, then you need to start going through your images, making sure that your website looks really clean and has that beautiful color palette in place and that beautiful messaging and brand voice and all of that wonderful stuff. And then you need to start designing graphics for social media, making sure that it's very cohesive whenever you're posting in a Facebook group or your Facebook group, your Instagram, your Twitter, all of that stuff that can be very overwhelming, but is very necessary to get your voice out there. And I think one of the best things people can do is have monthly themes and have that be across all social media, just because the repetition really helps people understand who you are and what you can offer.
Great advice. Great advice. I wish that I knew when I was first starting out 100 years ago. I think that it definitely makes sense to have a theme for every month because you're constantly, even though you're still being true to your core values, you'll have different ways to change up your brand messaging. And you can kind of theme out your year according to seasons, holidays, colors, just because you like colors. However, so do you have any other suggestions for how people could theme out their social media?
I think for me, I really enjoyed the pillars. I really enjoyed making monthly themes. Like for me, January is going to be video month. But be really strategic in terms of, if it is going to be video month, have 3 or 4 blogs that you're writing out. Be submitting for different guest posts that you can do that's on theme with that. Make sure that you're doing live streams at least once a week that also are teaching in that way. Do some YouTube videos. That way you have enough content to not only populate social media, but to also go into your newsletters and your submissions and that kind of stuff. It just gives you, I can at least tend to feel like I have all of this knowledge on this topic, but when you break it down monthly, you can put it in tiny little action steps. Like, hey, make sure that when you're live streaming to have the camera a little bit higher and looking down at you, kind of like my webcam is now, because it's going to be a more attractive image. It sounds like something really simple, but when you put that as one action step in a day, in a month of content, it really helps your audience go, oh my gosh, I like her, I trust her, she knows what she's talking about, and that's a tip that I can immediately put into my business. So that's what I would probably say.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, and I think it's actionable, and I think that this is very helpful. So thank you so much for sharing that with all of us. Even the most savvy, marketers, we don't know everything. So that's great advice.
Yeah. Well, I think we should move on to putting you on the hot seat, Kristin.
Sure. Why not?
Let's kind of talk about, because you were mentioning how there's a little bit of confusion between publicity versus advertising. Let's dive into that a little bit and really show them the distinction and the benefits of publicity.
Okay. Yeah, no. And a lot of my students, they ask me the same thing. What is the difference between publicity and advertising? Well, advertising is something that anybody can purchase just as long as you have the money. You control the message, the frequency, the placement, and where you want to publish an ad. Whereas with publicity, it's up to the publication to cover you. But if you end up getting an editorial feature in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Vogue or the Huffington Post, you seem so much more credible to stakeholders. So it could be investors, employees, customers. I'm sure you can attest to this as well. Whenever you are on a website and you see as seen in, and you see they were featured in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or whatever, they're going to seem that much more credible because they get that third-party endorsement from an editor or from a television show.
Absolutely.
But it's free. Publicity is free. You do it on your own, but it's not guaranteed. And it could take a while to get media coverage. But once you do get that media coverage, I mean, you're pretty much set for a bunch of other media opportunities to follow. And that's why when I got into marketing, I had the opportunity to go into advertising or PR. I chose that PR because it's much more credible. And just my clients, there's nothing more gratifying than seeing them get in the New York Times and get that endorsement. And, you know, they can get more website traffic or sales or whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. So that's the primary distinction between the two.
I feel like you get a lot of emails or calls where they're like, oh my God! At least that's what
yeah. But, you know, I mean, things do happen on the other side too, where somebody might end up getting bumped. You know, I had somebody fly here from Australia and she was booked for Good Morning America, and the morning of her segment, she got bumped. And that happens.
Oh, yeah.
Luckily, I was able to get her CNN, but still, so there's always that, until that coverage comes out, you can't really, there's no guarantee.
Yeah, well, and I think that's true of anything in so many ways. Well, and I think that's a really good point, because a lot of entrepreneurs are online and they're on Facebook, and so they're constantly seeing certain people in paid advertising on their feed.
Yep.
And it can feel really frustrating because as someone that's starting out, they can go, well, I can't afford Facebook ads, so that means I'm never going to get like any acknowledgement or any publicity. And so I think this is a great point, because it's like, if you can be so on point with your brand messaging and your story and your colors and look super professional, then when you're submitting to all of these different publications that you don't have to pay for, you have such a higher chance of getting booked. And if you land something like Huffington Post or, oh my gosh, like Good Morning America or whatever it is, that is so much more powerful than doing Facebook ads.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the reach is, you know, sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm.
And if a potential customer comes to your website and they see that you are featured in the Huffington Post or Refinery 29 or whatever publication, versus you just, you know, coming up in their Facebook feed, obviously that media coverage is going to be that much more valuable, and it's going to help build that trust.
Yeah.
There's nothing like having that third-party endorsement really build that trust. And throughout the years, I've seen so many small business owners, friends, family members, you know what, Chris, I just keep on pitching and pitching and pitching, and I'm not getting any responses. And I'm like, well, let me see your pitch. And 99% of the time, it's self-serving bullshit. And editors, journalists, they don't have time for that. They are under so so much pressure as it is to get their stories done, to find valuable sources. You know, they get in between, like the New York Times, get in between 500 and 1,000 pitches a day. So
Man.
your subject line needs to stick out. You need to know your brand story before you can start the publicity process. If you're, like I said earlier, if you're just kind of shooting in the dark, trying to get media coverage in whatever publication, you're not going to be successful because you're not going to hit your objectives.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally relate to that. But it was really interesting for me when I finally started getting on point with my visuals and my website and the right language and all of that. I started my Visibility Vixen podcast. And I had like
Which
three
is
names.
fantastic, by the way.
Thank you. You're on it, so it's exciting. But I was sitting there and kind of writing like, oh, who are my dream people? And I thought, you know, maybe in a year or something I can book them. But when someone's looking at that kind of a request, they go to your site, they look at how it is and all of that. And I had every single person say yes. People like Melissa Farr and Adrienne Dorison and Mariah Cause, these huge thought leaders in our industry that had no problem doing that. And it wasn't because I was at this high level where everyone knew who I was. It was simply because there was clarity and there was a cohesive theme.
Exactly.
So this stuff works.
It does work.
So let's move on to the next question. What do you think are the biggest benefits for someone's business? Who have you kind of seen that you've been able to take from barely knowing who they are to kind of skyrocketing them because of focusing on publicity for their brand?
Well, you know, I mean, I've been in this industry for 12 plus years. Over the last, 8.5 years since I've launched my first agency, launched and grown over 150 brands. So
cool.
Yeah, it's been an interesting, very interesting journey. I'll tell you that much. But I've launched, the one-person startup that had $10,000 to spend on publicity to Fortune 500 companies, to some of the largest women's wear brands. And I just want to say, before I answer your question, for me, I enjoy working with the smaller brands because they're so much more nimble, and the owners, they can get shit done. Like when you're dealing with a company that's like as large as Ralph Lauren, to get a press release approved, it takes a month.
Oh my gosh.
Ridiculous. When you're working with a small business that has, 1, 2, 3, 4 people, you're able to turn stuff around, in a couple hours, and it's wonderful. So, but I would say 80% of the small businesses that I've worked with have gone from this to this. Not because of me, but because of my team. It's because we all work together. And we brainstorm with the client, we spend time with them, we really try and get to know their pain points and understand what they're trying to achieve. So I can give you a couple examples, or, it's completely up to you. Yeah,
I think, people that are watching this are trying to get out of the mindset of, I have to create blogs, I have to do posts, I have to do this, I have to do that, and having them look even bigger at their local TV network or, a certain magazine or a certain, that kind of stuff. They're trying to transition to going, oh, I can actually do this. I can actually pitch myself to these bigger things that I maybe never even dreamed that I could do. So I think any encouragement in that regard to kind of stimulate those creative and motivational juices would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that you and I had talked about the 21-year-old accessory designer that I had worked with, and she was from the Deep South. Didn't really have a lot of formal education, but she was sweet. Her products were great, and she was a true underdog. And the media loved challenger brands or underdog stories. So it was really positioning her in a sense of, David versus Goliath. And because we positioned her as such up against some of the larger accessory brands, she was able to get some stellar media coverage. And because of that media coverage, she was able to get into Nordstrom.
Wow.
Which is huge. So, but it took time. It wasn't something that happened overnight. We worked together for years to build her brand. But if you have the right brand messaging, you have a good story, like I was saying, this whole David versus Goliath brand positioning, the possibilities are endless. But it does take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. You're going to get a lot of rejections in the beginning, but you know what? You just keep on going along. All PR people, we start from somewhere. And when we do start out, we have no relationships. So, and we take, it takes time to cultivate those relationships. But once you do have them and you have your brand story, it really is sky's the limit.
I love that point, because it's like, the people listening, you kind of have to take a second look at your past and where you've come from.
Yeah.
A lot of times in your bio, you're like, oh, well, I've done this and this and this. And that can kind of make people go, oh, I don't know. And that's why, like, on my About page, one of my biggest talking points is I was told by a very famous Hollywood actress when I was 14 that I was too ugly and fat to ever be on camera. And that was one of the most powerful points in my copy on my Comfy on Camera challenge, because people don't want to just look at a happy blonde that they think has always had everything together and everything handed to her and take a challenge from her. They want to take it from someone that has been through the muck and can understand and relate to their pain. I mean, there's people that are live streaming day 1 or 2 and crying or, shaking because they're so afraid to be on camera.
Yeah.
So whatever business you're in, whatever brand that you're representing, go back through the pain points. Where have your rejections been? Where have your traumas been? And how can you really relate that to your audience and be that David versus Goliath story? Because I think a lot of us try to cover that up because we don't think that it's pretty to our audience, but it's actually what our audience really needs to hear.
Right. Yeah. They need to be able to relate to you, to trust you. And the same thing goes for the media. There's no reason why you can't be vulnerable and just give them the whole story, and just show them, like you said, your past, present, and where you're headed. So, and I know that it sounds so overwhelming because we talked about so many different components between the branding side and the PR side. But throughout this challenge, we are going to be going through with you every step of the way, how you're able to set your brand up for success and how to use it to get media coverage. And I'm not just talking about small media coverage, in your local penny saver. I'm talking about national media coverage that we all aspire to get.
Well, I love that. I mean, Kristin, since you've come into my life, which was such an unexpected blessing, my business has changed a lot. It's been very eye-opening for me because, guys, I come from a TV film background, but I have no idea what happens once it's actually edited and out there, like how it gets to the world. So I didn't know any of this stuff when it came to publicity in terms of getting your brand out there on a bigger scale. So it's really exciting to have someone that's had all of this amazing experience that is bringing that now to entrepreneurs to really help us grow our stuff and aspire and accomplish these huge things. So Kristin, thank you for being here and giving us a little bit of education today. It was fun.
Thank you for having me. And I have to say the same about you with video and branding. Like I said, being a marketer, you can't know it all. And you have to find people that can help fill your weak spots. And when it comes to video and it comes to color theory and everything, I would say you're definitely my alter ego because I just lack that side of the brain, that part of the brain.
I think our brains together are a pretty good match.
Yeah. It's really yin and yang. It's wonderful.
Very much. Okay, guys, so you're going to be getting a couple more emails in the next couple of days. We're really excited to spend this time with you. Feel free to list any questions or comments below, and we would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, make this a really wonderful day for your brand and your PR.